He's hoping he's closer to trouble. Right. Morning, Dave.
Good morning. Your letter to the editor was very nice.
Thank you. All of you see all the Republicans fight for God.
Okay.
And so they're
Good morning and welcome.
first of all, I'm not identified. Let's have a cup of coffee.
Somebody else tell me if I did.
And then freedom, I said.
Everybody else tell me if I did.
Understand is what freedom means to you. Because freedom for me means the right of choices, acknowledgement of
So we could say. Anyway,
Yes. The value system, the 10 just like flip-flops, you know, so.
Yeah, I know. I should have done the first bell.
Democrats and stuff, you know, and it just goes like this. Yeah, it's, but I care more about that person first. So, and I keep trying to find how the vision of I'm sorry, did I not make that clear? That's when people really have the opportunity to ask you one question.
Haley's Harper, yeah.
They're gonna stay away.
All the way around. That's what we did. That was the band throughout the band. Did you? Yeah. I think that's what everybody's been saying. We just had stayed away. I was busy yesterday. A little shopping.
Particularly coming home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad to see
That's what
him.
you're saying. Yeah. And the restaurant. Yeah, yeah, we do. Yeah. Oh, we love it.
Well, I hope so.
No.
Here. He will.
That was a learning curve for us. We hadn't done
Nice.
Thank you, Carol. A lovely way to start our service. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Door County. My name is Cindy Nelson, and I feel blessed to be a member of this fellowship and to lead you in service today. Thank you for joining us. We welcome you. We know you come here for different reasons: to find community, to seek your spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to explore new ideas, to find comfort, and perhaps to find answers. We welcome you. We know you come from different places, different religions, different beliefs, different backgrounds. We hope you will find comfort, connection, challenge, and love. I'd like to welcome any guests we have today and our online friends. Thank you for taking the time to walk through our doors or to tune in to join us in worship. If we have some new folks today, we would love it if you would feel comfortable standing and introducing yourselves and perhaps telling us where you are from. Anyone feel comfortable? I can see some new folks.
We've actually been here before, Edie and Jack Gardner, and it was oriented differently. I think we sat over there, but this was probably 15 years ago. Yeah. So we're mostly from Madison. We also have a place in Bailey's Harbor, and we've knocked around some at the First Unitarian over the years. But let me make a little speech. I'm delighted you have a community like this in Door County that's based on free thought, and it's a wonderful thing to have as an alternative. So,
Well,
and Edie is much more eloquent than I am.
thank you for joining us, and we feel blessed that we are all here and have this available to us for sure. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all for being here with us today. After our service, we will have coffee and conversation in the gathering room for, about 10 to 15 minutes after the service ends. And then we will rejoin Suzelle over in this part of the room for our morning discussion. At this time, let me introduce the Reverend Suzelle Lynch. It's been delightful getting to know her this morning. Besides her biography on the front of our order of service, Suzelle shared that she and our very own Reverend Cynthia Johnson served together in Dallas, Texas. She was an intern at that time. Yes, just a couple of years ago. So it is a small world for sure. Well, we welcome you, Suzelle, and her partner, Tom. And now that you are close by in Janesville, perhaps we will see more of you in Door County. A few housekeeping details. Please raise your hand if at any time you are not able to hear us. Marilyn will monitor it so that you can. Also, please turn off any cell phones or, all those things that make noise and disturb us. And thank you for continuing to wear masks as we all stay healthily together. At this time, if we have any announcements for the good of the fellowship, Bruce has the mic. Please raise your hand. Any announcements this morning? No announcements? What has happened? Okay, all right. Thanks, Bruce. Job done. Well done. I will turn it over to Suzelle, who will lead us in our opening.
Good morning. It's good to be with you. Come into this circle of love and justice. Come into this community of hope and promise, mystery and meaning. Come into this sacred place where we remember who we are and how we want to live. Come, let us worship together. Let us shape worth together. Come, let us celebrate.
Please stand as you are able to say the unison affirmation and to sing the doxology. We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within a caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives.
Skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung. May every hand by every tongue.
I invite you to join your hearts and your minds with mine in a meditative spirit. Find your place of comfort, your place of centering, and follow along with my voice. Spirit of life and love, breathing in us and through us and all around us, reaching out from each person here to touch all of the others in this room, and reaching out far across our world, touching all living things. We give thanks this morning for the extraordinary possibilities that present them to us in the midst of our everyday lives. The moment when the light catches the tears in someone else's eyes and we reach for their hand, knowing that the possibility of healing is near. The healing that is possible when we're present to each other's pain and sadness, or when we celebrate each other's joy and success. And in that moment when hands touch, we come alive to the possibility that someone else's story can change our own. Possibilities are everywhere. They call to us in the words we read on the spine of a book on our shelf or through the scroll of posts on a phone screen. Words that invite us to live out loud, circle in song, act for justice, awaken to spirit, or cook with joy. So much potential is always at our fingertips. Will we soften? Will we open ourselves? Will we bend our steps to meet the call of the words? Our limitations might invite us to be cautious or fearful in the place of possibility. As we pause here with autumn unfolding around us, marveling at the magnificent trees, whispering of change. Will we be cautious? Yet even within any smaller circle we draw around ourselves, possibilities abound if we pay attention. And even if we don't, for not one of us can know what tomorrow will bring. And so let us give at least part of ourselves to the mystery, knowing that what we do not now know, what we do not now understand, may be the key to our unfolding, may hold the potential of friendship, the promise of beauty, or a gift of ordinary divinity. Shalom, blessed be, Ashe, and Amen.
And now to share our joys and concerns, those that delight us so that others may share in our happiness, and those that burden us so that we as a community may share in your hardship. Again, remember this is live, so please, if you are speaking for or about someone else, make sure you have their permission. Again, Bruce will do a great job at this, so. Any joys and concerns this morning?
David, I, and Lynn Lees had the extreme pleasure of attending a program at St. Norbert College, which, among a few others, honored our very own Holly Nickerson, now known as Holly Lynn. She changed her name. Didn't get married though. She changed her name. Who has been doing wondrous things in her life. She spent 3 years working with Peace Corps as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Ukraine, and she was therefore honored by her alma mater for her good work. And it was such a pleasure to be there and share with her. She's a gem.
How wonderful. Thank you. Yes, many of us will remember Holly spoke here a couple times.
Lynn Lees, I just want to admit that Holly is Lynn Olson's granddaughter.
Granddaughter. Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for attending that. I'm sure she was pleased to have someone here. Joys and concerns? Okay, thank you. And now for our offering. To keep our fellowship alive and well, we need your time, your talents, and your money. So please be as generous as you are able. As we move to a moment of quiet, let us take the time to center ourselves so that we may fully hear what Suzelle has to share.
I have 2 readings to share with you this morning that may be more than you're used to, but I hope that you enjoy them. The first one comes from the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a scientist, plant ecologist, and member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. Have any of you read her book, Braiding Sweetgrass? Yeah, such a great book. She graciously invites the sharing of stories from this book, and I'm sharing the story with you today with care and respect for the people from whom this story comes. A column of light streamed from a hole in the sky world, and through it she fell like a maple seed, pirouetting on an autumn breeze. It took a long time for her to fall. In fear, or maybe hope, she clutched a bundle tightly in her hand. Hurtling downward, she saw only dark water below. But in that emptiness, there were many eyes gazing up at the sudden shaft of light. They saw there a small object, a mere dust mote in the beam. As it grew closer, they could see it was a woman, arms outstretched, long black hair billowing behind as she spiraled toward them. The geese nodded at each other and rose together from the water in a wave of goose music. Sky Woman felt the beat of their wings as they flew beneath to break her fall. Far from the only home she'd ever known, she caught her breath at the warm embrace of soft feathers as they gently carried her downward. And so it began. The geese could not hold the woman above water for very long, so they called a council to decide what to do. Sky Woman saw them all gather, loons, otters, swans, beavers, fish of all kinds. A great turtle floated in their midst and offered his back for her to rest on. The others understood that she needed land for her home, and they discussed how they might meet this need. The deep divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of the water and agreed to go find some. Loon dove first, but the distance was too far. One by one, the other animals offered to help: otter, beaver, sturgeon. But the depth, the darkness, and the pressures were too great for even the strongest of swimmers. They returned, gasping for air with their heads ringing. Soon, only little Muskrat was left, the weakest diver of them all. He volunteered to go while the others looked on doubtfully. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward, and he was gone a very, very long time. They waited and waited for him to return, fearing the worst for their small relative. And before long, a stream of bubbles rose with the small, limp body of the muskrat. He had given his life to aid this hapless human. But then the others noticed that his paw was tightly clenched. And when they opened it, there was a small handful of mud. Turtle said, "Here, put the mud on my back, and I will hold it." Sky Woman bent and spread the mud with her hands across the turtle's shell. Moved by the extraordinary gifts of the animal, she sang in thanksgiving and then began to dance, her feet caressing the earth. As she danced her thanks, the land grew and grew from the dab of mud on Turtle's back until the whole earth was made. Not made by Sky Woman alone, but from the alchemy of all the animal's gifts, coupled with her deep gratitude. Together, they formed what we know today as Turtle Island, our home. Like any good guest, Sky Woman had not come empty-handed. When she toppled from the hole in the sky world, she had reached out to grab onto the tree of life that grew there. In her grasp were leaves and branches, fruits and seeds from all kinds of plants. These she scattered onto the new ground and carefully tended each one until the world grew from brown to green. Sunlight streamed through the hole from the sky world, allowing wild grasses, flowers, trees, and medicines to flourish and spread everywhere. And now that the animals, too, had plenty to eat, many of them came to live with her on Turtle Island. Dr. Kimmerer notes, "The story of Sky Woman's journey is so rich and glittering, it feels to me like a deep bowl of celestial blue from which I could drink again and again. It holds our beliefs, our history, our relationships. Images of Sky Woman speak not just of where we come from, but also of how we can go forward. Children hearing the Sky Woman story from birth know in their very bones the responsibility that flows between humans and the earth." I love that story, don't you? Actually heard that story growing up in a lay-led UU fellowship, much like this one. where it was as likely to be my mother in the pulpit and my dad teaching religious education as anyone else. Our second reading comes from Systemic Racism 401, The Myth of Meritocracy by Milwaukee's Reggie Jackson, and this was published in the Milwaukee Independent online newspaper. A well-known proverb tells us that to the victor go the spoils. Simply put, the winners get to tell what happened. In America, the winners have nearly always been those we call white. White people have told themselves and the world a version of American history which appears to justify the current state of affairs. For the most part, this version of history we all learn tells a story of meritocracy in America. Those who have had success are assumed to have earned it. We spend years being taught about the elites and famous people of American society in schools. The rough lives of average people rarely make it into our history textbooks. Patriotism is one of the aims of our education. The theory is that if we learn about the triumphs of America, we will learn to love our country. In 1983, Philip D. Curtin, former American Historical Association president, wrote, "In the 19th century and too far into the 20th, history was consciously one-sided. It was not supposed to be even-handed, but designed instead to promote patriotism and glorify the nation. These tendencies reached a kind of apogee with the overblown patriotic fervor of the First World War." Reggie Jackson continues, "There is an opposite side of the coin. We must examine how the American caste system has prevented some from obtaining the tools necessary to access the merits of society, and we must tell that story as well." So here end our readings, and you're invited now to join in singing, which I understand is the first hymn besides the doxology you've sung in a while. I love singing, so I didn't even ask if I could have a hymn. I just brought one. So please rise for number 77. She'll play through for us, please. Seek out afar for beauty only grows. Into darkness all about your feet. In birds in sunshine, childish graces sweet. In stars and mountains, silence dark with snows. From God above, for happiness behold. It is a flower blooming at your door. Bring love and laughter home and evermore. Joy shall be yours as changing years unfold. In one burning toss of bush of flame, we look for truth and fancy it concealed. But givers come and things it stands revealed. While grass and flowers and stars spell out the day. Good job. It's hard to get back in the habit, I think. So, ghost stories. This is exactly the right time of year for ghost stories. Autumn, of course, brings Halloween and the Celtic earth-centered holiday of Samhain And as these holidays draw near, it is said that the spirits of our beloved dead are stirring and getting ready to cross the veil into the land of the living so that we can honor them and seek their advice. Do you like ghost stories? Now, you gotta know what I'm talking about here. I don't really mean the kind of stories you might have heard around the fire when you were a kid at camp. I'm sorry if that's disappointing. When I say ghost stories, I mean the stories from your life that stay with you, even when you try your best to shake them off. The stories that hang around our minds and hearts, even when we try to push them into a place of deep forgetting. Ghost stories are stories that haunt us. And they haunt us because they have something to say to us. I know that we all have these ghost stories. After all, our lives are awash in stories. It's like feminist poet Muriel Rukeyser said, the universe is not made of atoms, it's made of stories. We've all got stories rooted in our families and our heritage, stories about our ancestors. We've read biographies and histories and fiction, all full of stories. We've absorbed myths and narratives from the culture and the institutions that surround us. And of course, we have stories that we've told about ourselves and that others have told about themselves, and stories others have told us about us. I think stories are almost like music. They go deeper than the words. They entertain us and they educate us, but mostly they remind us of our humanness. They can help us live more consciously and fully because they light up the interconnections between life and history, art, and purpose. Stories remind us who we are, what is possible, and they also help us know that we're not alone with whatever faces us. So let me tell you a story. This one comes from a guy named Josh Gowan. He writes, when I was in high school, a teammate on my track team told me about the big oak tree in the backyard of the house he grew up in. One day, his older brother climbed high up into the tree's branches and then called for him to come over. Excited that his bigger older brother wanted to include him in the activity, my teammate ran over quickly as he could. As he gazed up into the tree with an eager smile, his brother peed down on him from above. Yikes. Josh Gowan said he too couldn't help but laugh at his friend's story. And then he wrote, the thought of him standing there, wide-eyed, and then suddenly realizing he'd been tricked, well, it reminded me of a similar incident in my own life. In the years that passed, Gowan and his teammate became the best of friends. He says, I suspect the story he shared, along with similar ones I shared, had a lot to do with it. So I've been haunted by this story Josh Gowan told ever since I first heard it, and now you're stuck with it as well. What's so sticky about this story? Well, most of us have memories of a time when we were kids and somebody tricked us? This story evokes our empathy. So we know empathy is powerful, and it actually turns out to be measurable as well. Josh Gowan, guess what? He's a behavioral neuroscientist, and he tells this story of his teammate as a way to get us thinking about the power of empathy. He cites a study conducted not too many years ago at Princeton that compared MRI scans of the brain of a person telling a story with MRI scans taken of the brains of people who were listening to the story. And the study showed that the same parts of the brain lighted up in exactly the same way in both the storyteller and the story listeners. But what we can't always measure is what happens after those neurons light up. We're accustomed to thinking of empathy as something that helps us build connections with each other. And that's super important, I think, particularly as people in a congregation. Really important. And I'll say a little bit more about that later on. But empathy also helps us connect to hidden parts of ourselves. Remember, ghost stories are stories that stay with us because they have something to tell us. And some of the stories that haunt us seem tailor-made to draw out these connections with deeper parts of ourselves. Do you ever think about your ancestors? Anybody here ever done Ancestry.com or family trees? The stories of our ancestors are the kind of ghost stories that can actually connect us to our deepest values. Some of us may be descended from the original inhabitants of this land, maybe even Sky Woman's people. Some of us are first-generation immigrants, and some of us, like me, carry the bloodlines of those immigrants. Some of us might be descendants of enslaved peoples forcibly brought to the Americas, and some of us are a mixture of many backgrounds. My ancestors, Jaakko and Sanna-Kaisa Virtanen, were Finnish immigrants who made their way to Michigan's Upper Peninsula in the early 1900s. Jaakko and Sanna-Kaisa were my great-grandparents. I never met them, but I was named for Sanna-Kaisa, whose name in English became Susanna Catherine. Isn't that lovely? She was a stern-faced woman, a hard-working dairy farmer who, when angered, I'm told, would mutter, "Satana, Satana, tuhat Satana," under her breath, which translates as devils, devils, 1,000 devils. So she would be mad and she would be, devils, devils, 1,000 devils. Jaakko and Sanna-Kaisa's story isn't extraordinary, like so many immigrants who came to this country when they did. And like so many of the Ukrainians who came here earlier this year and the Venezuelans who are coming here now, they were fleeing political unrest and oppression. In an odd parallel to the Ukrainians, my ancestors' oppressors were the Russians who occupied and controlled Finland for a very long time. Jaakko came over by himself in 1906. A bit like Sky Woman, he arrived with little in his pockets but hope. But also like Sky Woman, he wasn't empty-handed. She came clutching the seeds that helped create a living earth. He came carrying his skills, his stories, and the courage to risk living in a place where most establishments had signs posted that said, "No dogs and no Finns allowed." What Jaakko didn't know was that it would be 10 years before Sanna-Kaisa would be able to get out of Finland and come and join him. And by then, only their youngest child, my grandmother, Elna, would emigrate with her. They were forced to leave their 2 older children behind. I went searching for Jaakko and Sanna-Kaisa's story at a time in my life when I really needed to better understand my own family. Oppression, poverty, courage, flight, the ache of family separation. These were unexpected. And I'm haunted by their history and also by the way these things shaped my family's commitment to social justice and building community in their Unitarian Universalist congregations. And it's also shaped my deeply held conviction that as UUs, we need to open the doors wide and wider still to welcome in the stranger and allow their guests, their gifts to change us, to change who we are. Sanna-Kaisa and Jaakko's story is underneath what drove me to become a minister. It also gives me sympathy for the people of war-torn places like Ukraine. In their stalwart determination and hopeful faces, I see the faces of my people. Have you considered the ways in which the stories of your ancestors shape your values and the way you live your life? As Americans, we're also haunted, whether we know it or not, by the stories of our collective culture. Reggie Jackson's article, Systemic Racism 401, The Myth of Meritocracy, is a good reminder of this. Reggie is a Milwaukee guy. He's a scholar and an educator and a consultant who helps individuals and institutions understand the history of our nation's racial hierarchy and white supremacy culture and its impact on our lives. I've had the honor of working with Reggie and learning from him. In a meritocracy, right, people succeed because of their ability. They get ahead because they work hard and they perform well, not because they had a head start due to cultural norms and privilege like wealth, whiteness, maleness, heterosexuality, or being non-disabled and neurotypical. We're soaked in this myth from the time we are born. The idea that those who get ahead deserve it because they're good, they're skillful, they're hardworking. And it's accompanied by the lie that anyone can succeed if they just work hard enough. Later in the article that Reggie Jackson wrote, he says, many of the privileges of belonging to the group we know as white came to millions of immigrants from Europe, but not necessarily right away. They arrived as Germans, Swedes, Poles, Italians, Finns, Greeks, Irish, and other ethnicities. But eventually they all successfully became white. Those of African heritage, Native Americans, immigrants from throughout Asia, as well as Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and others, did not have the benefit of joining this exclusive white club, even if their skin was white. As a result, they could not easily gain all the advantages of America. It's also true that America has bestowed merit and privilege to certain classes of whites more than others. The rich and so-called well-born have been at the front of the line and are generally seen as examples of American meritocracy. So we know these things, right? This isn't new. But the myth of meritocracy persists. It's embedded in us. It's in our subconscious minds. It follows us everywhere like a shadow on a sunny day. Do you remember the first time that you questioned this myth? That questioning moment is what folks call getting woke. And truly, consciously disengaging ourselves from a myth and the other stories that hold the sticky webworks of systemic racism and white supremacy culture in place is good. But getting woke is kind of a momentary thing. Dismantling old systems and building the beloved community of true equity that we Unitarian Universalists dream of is the work of a lifetime. To break down the myth of meritocracy, we need to use whatever power we have to work for change, including the power of our votes, and we all know that's coming, right? We also need to make a seat on our shoulders for those who experience oppression. So, you know the old image of a person with a devil on one shoulder urging indulgence and an angel on the other urging moderation? It's an old cartoon. Do it, no, do it, do it, don't do it. Imagine what could happen if we replaced those characters with new ones. I like to imagine Sky Woman on one shoulder and the little muskrat on the other, riding on my shoulders, guiding me with their generosity and their view of the world, not as a pie divided, but as a collective for which we all share responsibility. I'm happy to be haunted and transformed by their story. What I mean is that being haunted by a story isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it can be a blessing or an indication of the direction we must go or the change we must make. But sometimes we need to release stories that are holding parts of us hostage, that have a grip on our souls. So let me tell you another story. One day, my colleague, the Reverend Rebecca Parker, was visiting a congregation member, an older woman whose name was Maxine, And that same day, Maxine had gotten a letter from her brother Lyle telling of his volunteer work with migrant farmers. You know, Maxine mused, we never thought Lyle would be able to do something like that. In fact, we thought we'd lost him. In 1945, Lyle had come home from the war, and he was the only veteran to return alive to the small town in Iowa where he and Maxine had grown up. When the train he was on pulled into the station in response to the music and cheers from the joyful welcoming party, Lyle just stared. Mutely, he didn't seem to recognize anyone, not even his family. So they took him home to the farm, where he sat in a rocker in the parlor, not speaking, not sleeping, and barely even eating. Maxine decided to keep Lyle company. Whenever she could, she would sit next to him in the parlor and talk, telling him stories from the farm and the town, from church, and she would tell him stories until she ran out of words. And then she would just sit with him, darning socks, snapping beans. Lyle never spoke. He just rocked with his face like a stone. Days flowed into weeks, and weeks flowed into months. And then late one night, when everyone else was in bed, Maxine noticed Lyle's eyes spilling over with tears. She put her arms around him as he sobbed. And then he started to talk. He talked and he talked. He talked about the noise and the cold and the smoke. He told her stories of how his buddies died, about the concentration camps, about the mass graves, about the smell. He talked and he talked all night. And Maxine listened. When morning came, she went into the kitchen and cooked him breakfast. He ate, and then he went out and did the morning chores. Maxine's steady, listening presence with Lyle allowed him to unfreeze his grief and release the stories that were haunting him. I wonder if you have a story, a ghost story locked inside, one that's holding a piece of your soul hostage. Like getting woke, like replacing the angel and the devil on our shoulders with new guides, uncovering, understanding, and owning our own ghost stories can be the beginning of transformation. Part of the power of religious communities like this one is having a place to tell our stories, and a community of caring people who can receive our stories with compassion, empathy, and grace. The second half of that power is to be a person who's willing to receive the stories of others. This is the season for ghost stories. Look around this room. Perhaps there is someone here whom you can entrust with one of the stories that haunts you. Perhaps there's someone here who needs to hear your story to unlock one of their own. Perhaps there's someone here who needs you to be a caring listener for their ghost story. The universe is made of stories, my friends. And stories, your stories and mine, are meant to be shared. Shalom, blessed be, Ashe, and Amen. For our closing words, I actually have a little song to share with you. You're the first people to hear it besides my sweetie and my songwriting group. I think we Unitarian Universalists don't have enough recessional songs, so this is a recessional song. May the wise wind lift you on its wings. May cool waters soothe your aching thirst. May the fire draw your people into a sacred circle. And may the earth be firm beneath your feet. As you go forth now from this peaceful place, as you return into a world of hope and pain, may this time we've had together fill your soul with pleasure and hold your heart until we meet again.
Please go enjoy a cup of coffee or tea, and we will meet back here at about 5 after 11 for about a half hour visiting with Suzelle. Thank you. Really good, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay.
Nicely done, Carol. Thank you. That was very, that was lovely. I'm
Thank you for joining us. Come back in a little bit on our Zoom channel for the talk back.
Yeah.